The end of the United Kingdom is upon us. Over 1,000 years of history in the British Isles has changed the course of Europe and the world. The recent death of the Queen and the incredible instability that is brewing in the United Kingdom may be enough to topple the country's long-standing position in the world in the coming years. People outside of the UK don't quite realize the state the UK is in right now. Energy bills for people are skyrocketing, outpacing anywhere in Europe. The currency is collapsing. International investors and bankers won't touch the pound with a 10-foot barge pole at the moment. They are all shorting the currency in complete unity. Every economist you ask is very bearish on the short-term prospects of Britain. Inflation is further crippling the currency. The latest government figures are 10.1% inflation. But because of the way inflation is calculated by the government and sly tactics they use to make it appear less, it is most likely 20% to 30%. The Bank of England is trying to respond to inflation by steeply increasing interest rates, which in economics usually curbs inflation as it becomes more expensive for people to borrow, so people save money. However, that means things like mortgage payments on homes, which is the largest positive wealth effect source for most people, are more expensive, making the original cost of living problem even worse. This also shuts down an avenue that lots of people are resorting to for extra money by releasing equity for quick cash but stabbing themselves in the back later on, meaning any chance of a recovery in the next few years are reduced. And in this moment of extreme desperation for most UK citizens, lots of people are looking to the government to help them. A new Prime Minister and Chancellor came into power in mid-September, which in hindsight was a catastrophic move. Liz Truss believes that she is the second coming of Margaret Thatcher and believes the UK will grow the way out of this problem, despite the huge evidence that growth in the UK is minimal at the best of times. The Chancellor announced tax cuts and removal of bankers' bonuses. Now, whatever your political view may be, this caused the pound to fall dangerously low to parity with the US dollar. This is an incredibly fragile situation for the UK to be in, and with the death of the Queen and a growing anti-establishment, anti-monarchy movement, it only makes the UK's problems worse. Economically, Britain has virtually no prospects. The UK has a very small manufacturing sector, a far cry away from the strength of northern industrial cities in the 20th century. Agriculture is non-existent at a tiny 0.6% of the economy. Most of the economy is made up of services like financial and consumer-focused business such as food and retail. Britain used to be a very big coal exporter, but that was wrapped up years ago, and the swaths of gas reserves that are on Britain's coast in the North Sea are refused to be extracted due to our green goals. However, the UK government has now announced there will be rolling blackouts around the country for up to 3 hours to save fuel. Britain has become a totalitarian state. The size of the UK government is immense. The government has over 5.6 million people on their payroll, and excluding the Public Health Service, that number is still 3.8 million people working directly for the government. All this in proportion to a working population of 29 million, meaning for every 6 working people in the UK, one of them works for the government. And as a result, Britain has some of the highest taxes in the world, only short of Scandinavia. However, Scandinavia has a tax model of high taxes, high service, whereas Britain is a high tax, low service economy as a legacy of the British Empire and the World Wars, as crazy as that sounds. This means that rich people would do anything but base their businesses in Britain. And all of the largest companies that are still based in Britain are because of a legacy of government ownership. British Airways, BT, BP, Jaguar, Rolls-Royce and British Gas all used to be in part of fully owned by the government. But you never hear of a new startup out of the UK that is trailblazing the London Stock Exchange. And any startup with real potential that does begin in the UK, as soon as any venture capitalists start getting interested, their first order of business is to move to Silicon Valley or New York. There is a massive shortage of wealth in the UK as a result. Ironically, the UK also relies on massive amounts of dirty money specifically going into property in London, one source of which was from Russian oligarchs who were kicked out after this year's war. If the UK wants any future, it needs to attract wealthy people to come and live here, but there is no attraction to living in the UK for the rich, terrible weather, high tax, and a lack of resorts. This is clear when you look at the amount of billionaires that are based in the UK. Billionaires look at the UK and vomit. This is a perfect example of the hard truth of the tax the rich group. If you try to tax the rich high rates, they will move and go somewhere where there are low taxes. To make matters worse, there is a migrant crisis with people crossing the channel in droves by the thousands every single week, overwhelming the system and causing violence and attacks on the migrant processing centers. This is an escalation of an existing problem with border crossings that diplomacy with France and Europe is yet to solve. The solution seemed to come about in the summer when a deal with Rwanda was struck in order to send migrants there to start a new life. But with all of the people due to get on the first flight suing the immigration force, this delays the deportation with a fresh lawsuit. In hindsight, Brexit has made these economic problems much worse. Recent figures suggest that the UK has suffered a GDP loss of around 5% as a result of the lost trade due to Brexit. If you were to ask the people of the UK, should Brexit have happened, the vast majority, including people that voted for Brexit 6 years ago, would tell you no. As reflective of most democracies in crisis, leadership is changed every few months. In 2022 alone, there have been 3 prime ministers. All within 3 months of each other, ministers are getting put into new jobs and then 6 weeks being told to either move to another job in government or getting axed entirely. This sounds like an exaggeration, but it's really not. In all 49 days of Liz Truss being Prime Minister, the cabinet got all shaken up, not allowing the cabinet to perform its job properly, as it can barely get through the door before they are told to go somewhere else. Another problem with the current situation of the UK is the lack of political competition. Unlike the US, there are 2 main parties, the Conservatives and Labour. Labour has equally poor leadership, and is generally seen as a very poor version of itself compared to its historical prominence under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. And beyond those 2 there really are no other viable options for political parties. The UK really is in a state of crisis, representing a larger fall from grace. The UK most likely won't exist 100 years from now, whatever that looks like, we will have to see.